One of the many trivial reasons my now ex-wife gave for divorcing me was that I didn't mow the lawn in straight lines. The funny thing is, most of the time, it happened because one of our sons would be asleep on my lap while I was using the riding mower. A family friend once said, "Because I married the wrong brother." 2 years later, she tied the knot with the older sibling instead, and they've now been happily married for 2 decades with a child together. My mom ended her marriage with my stepdad after he received a $15,000 inheritance from his late mother and spent it on his own car. This was despite the fact that he covered all household expenses, while my mom collected Social Security and considered that money hers alone. She's a terrible person who only seems to care about finances. My grandmother took her second husband to court to get a divorce because he gave me a puppy for my 7th birthday. Apparently, she felt like his gift overshadowed what she had gotten me. A friend of mine had his marriage fall apart after just 3 months. When people asked his wife why she left, she admitted there was nothing really wrong. She just couldn't stand his loud snoring. At worst, they could have just slept in separate rooms. A husband repeatedly left his wet, used towels on their bed. After numerous complaints and no changes, his wife finally had enough and decided to divorce him. My ex once shared that his grandmother was into astrology and psychic readings when she was younger. I'm not sure if she still was later in life. Apparently, a reading told her that her 3rd marriage would be the one that lasted, so she deliberately rushed into and out of 2 quick marriages just to get to the 3rd. As it turns out, she stayed with her 3rd husband until she passed, so maybe the prediction was right. Or maybe, by that point, she was just determined to make it work to prove a point. I always thought it was a wild story. My uncle, who has been divorced 5 times, ended his 4th marriage because his wife's children from a previous relationship kept eating the Twinkies he bought for his work lunches. I knew a couple where the husband was a farmer. He financially supported his wife while she pursued her education, climbing the ranks from a nurse to a physician assistant. But once she started working in a doctor's office, she decided she was too intelligent for her uneducated farmer husband and divorced him because he wasn't on her level intellectually. As a volunteer at an animal shelter, I once witnessed a couple get into an intense argument over one of our cats. The temporary name on the cat's enclosure was Tinkerbell. The wife found it adorable and insisted it was the perfect fit, while the husband flat out refused to have a pet with that name, saying they'd have to change it if they adopted her. They spent about 15 minutes bickering back and forth, with the husband throwing out random suggestions like pickles and wombat. I explained that the name had only been temporary and that most adopters rename their pets anyway. But the wife was adamant. Changing a pet's name, she claimed, was cruel, and this cat was undeniably a Tinkerbell. She then proceeded to coo at the cat in exaggerated baby talk, which I found irritating. Apparently, her husband felt the same way, because after a few more minutes of listening to her, he suddenly blurted out, "Not only do I not want a pet named Tinkerbell, I don't want a pet at all. In fact, I want a divorce." And then he walked out. We later reassured Tinkerbell that she wasn't to blame for their breakup, and within hours she was adopted by a lovely couple who named her Daisy. As a divorce attorney, I once had a client whose wife ended their marriage simply because she didn't get along with his sister. Just once. They had a single disagreement. That was all. Since he didn't take his wife's side, she got angry and immediately filed for divorce. When she testified, she admitted they had a wonderful relationship and that he was a great father. But she just couldn't move past that one incident. The judge, who had been on the bench for over 2 decades, shook his head and told them, "This is the dumbest reason I've ever seen anyone get divorced." My mother-in-law and her second husband both ran a business selling secondhand books. They had a massive hall filled with books, separated by a central walkway. One day, a book fell from a box and landed in the middle of the path. They argued so fiercely over whose book it was that they ended up divorcing. The book's value? $4. Their yearly income? over $150,000 each. Edit. Since this comment took off, here are answers to common questions. 1. No, I don't know who got the book. 2. It was a children's story about a bear. 3. Yes, she earns a lot selling books. They had agreements with thrift stores and estate cleanout companies, allowing them to sift through books and purchase them for a few dollars each. Some books, especially in fields like science, theology, or philosophy, can sell for $200 to $300, and rare editions might even go for $1,000. They sold online through a marketplace similar to Amazon. He just doesn't socialize enough at gatherings. That was the best explanation my ex-wife could offer when the marriage counselor asked why she had fallen out of love with me. I just sat there, shaking my head. I personally think it's petty, but some people file for divorce when they find out their spouse wasn't a virgin at the time of marriage. A friend of mine had a seizure while sleeping and ended up in the ICU for a couple of days. Afterward, he was placed on a 90-day leave of absence. The day he found out he'd have to take the leave, his wife immediately filed for divorce, saying he was useless to her without his usual level of income. A buddy of mine got divorced because he didn't share his wife's enthusiasm for romantic comedies. Turns out, not shedding tears over The Notebook was a deal-breaker for her. Sounds ridiculous, right? In my opinion, nothing beats the absurdity of divorcing someone just because they get cancer. My dad's second wife left him after we confronted her about her racism, and she didn't like it. My wife and kids are black. Instead of apologizing, she decided to file for divorce. My grandmother ended her 5th marriage because her husband refused to let her renovate their kitchen. I wasn't fond of the guy, but honestly, that seemed like a silly reason to split up. A friend of mine swears his wife left him for absolutely no reason, and that he did nothing wrong. But according to her, he spent 92% of their time together glued to his phone. I believe her because I stopped hanging out with him for the same reason. I'd be mid-story, look over at him, and he'd just be typing away, completely ignoring me. My ex-wife was the most self-centered and negative person I've ever known. She wasn't always that way, otherwise I wouldn't have married her. She expected everything to go her way, and when I finally started standing my ground, she filed for divorce. In our state, the person filing has to testify in court about their reason for wanting a divorce. When the judge asked her why she was ending the marriage, she replied, "We're just two different people." The judge wasn't satisfied and asked her to elaborate. After a brief pause, she added, "We don't see things the same way. I see everything in black and white, and he sees things as gray." The judge looked completely bewildered. He glanced at me with what I can only describe as pity, then dismissed her from the stand and finalized our divorce. I wish this were a joke, but a girl from my track team divorced her husband solely because he switched to an Android phone. Her justification? With his previous device, his account was synced across their shared devices, allowing her to monitor everything he did. The moment he switched, she assumed he must be hiding something. Luckily, their marriage didn't last more than 6 months. My uncle ended his 6th marriage just so he could remarry his first wife. A couple of weeks after I was medically discharged from the military, my ex-wife left me. Her reason? She wanted to be with someone who could take care of her. She quickly moved on to another guy who was still in the military, clearly just chasing the benefits. While it wasn't a divorce, my brother's wife's sister actually called off her wedding because new kids on the block were going on a reunion tour. She ultimately decided that attending the concert was more important than getting married. My former husband claimed he wanted to end our marriage because I wasn't washing enough dishes. I pointed out that the real issue might be that he would burst into tears every time he saw a pregnant woman, while we were exhausting all options to have children. Then he admitted he had been unfaithful, with a woman nearly 13 years younger than him, who lived on the other side of the world. This happened while I was visiting my parents for support after our dog passed away, something he couldn't emotionally handle, despite me managing all the logistics. I don't believe the dishes were the real problem. My brother's ex-wife only married him to make a statement to her parents that she could settle down, start a family, and leave her partying days behind. After they had a child, she pushed him into getting a vasectomy and then divorced him, since she had never actually loved him and had been miserable the entire time. She gained weight and he filed for divorce, saying he was no longer attracted to her. The ironic part, after the split, she worked out, got back into amazing shape, and suddenly, he wanted her back. Naturally, she told him to get lost. She's been in a happy relationship with her personal trainer for 3 years now. A co-worker of mine used to work in an oncology unit, where one of the doctors actually divorced his wife after she was diagnosed with cancer. Pretty much everyone in the department despised him. From what I was told, new employees were even briefed about what he had done so they'd be aware of what kind of person he was. Word is, his wife overcame the illness, and he eventually ended up transferring to a different hospital. Dad announces, "Sweetheart, I want a divorce." Mom responds, "Oh, wow. Well, damn. Hey, kiddo, who do you want to live with, me or your father?" The child replies, "I want to stay with Dad." To which the father suddenly exclaims, "Oh, crap. I don't actually want a divorce. After getting married, my ex became obsessed with the gym. 2 years in, he demanded a divorce because I couldn't recall how much weight he was pressing on the leg machine. Months earlier, he had outright banned me from joining him at the gym, claiming I didn't fit his energy. When I finally returned, I focused on my own workout, but apparently not paying full attention to him was unacceptable. Classic narcissist behavior. He immediately moved on to someone new, but his excuse about the weights was just ridiculous. "I stopped loving you after your father died. I realized you were grieving, but I had needs too." That was my ex-wife's justification for cheating and immediately moving in with someone else. I hope my friend doesn't mind me sharing, but her husband ended their marriage after just 3 months because he felt she wasn't affectionate enough. This was her first ever relationship, let alone marriage, while he was already on his 3rd. Both of them worked full-time, but since his job was 2 hours away, he sometimes stayed overnight at work for convenience. When he did come home, he expected meals, intimacy, and cuddling, but never once mentioned any of this until the day he told her he was leaving.